Yeah, so that concludes our first hour. We can begin our second hour right now, if you guys are up for it. We'll begin with each speaker taking 10 minutes each to discuss the science behind their position. So we can, well, let's see. Doug Hamp for the first hour started for all of that. So why don't we start with Doug Woodward? Um, so you each get 10 minutes each to discuss the science behind your position. Doug Woodward, go for it.
All right, am I unmuted? Looks like I am. All right. Well, obviously, the one advantage that in this debate that that I may come to is that most of the scientific community, not all, but most of the scientific community, believes that the universe is 13.7 billion years old, and that this solar system, the Earth, the Moon, is approximately 4.5 billion years old. And of course, the real question is, well, why do they believe that? As Doug and I were preparing for this, I was doing, of course, research and looking at various arguments, and I'm not dissuaded by some of the arguments for the young Earth. I think there are some arguments, and I bet Doug will bring up a few. But there are, of course, many arguments. Now, that does not mean that I'm agreeing that evolution plays a role here. We won't get into, in this debate, I think, the discussion about, how might have God created and then moved from one aeon to the next, from one, we'll talk about the ages, the Cambrian age to the Jurassic age and all those kinds of things. I'm not a scientist, so I would be hard pressed to speak very articulately in that respect as well. But nevertheless, there are a number of arguments in terms of the age of the Earth being quite old. There is a particular group that, for those that are listening to this debate and are curious to learn more about the, there we go, having a hard time with having enough real estate on my desktop here to be able to put everything up here. There is a group called BioLogos that is a theistic evolution group. They are Christians. They believe in theistic evolution, but they have a wealth of articles pertinent to both intelligent design, the age of the Earth, and so forth. And so they are a group to turn to. For equal time, we had also certainly mentioned the Creation Research Institute that Henry Morris founded. They have a great number of articles that deal with the issue of why the Earth is young. And as I said to Doug Hamp earlier in the week, it strikes me that intelligent scientists can find good arguments for either the age, the ancient Earth, or a young Earth. And so to some extent, I think it's relevant to bring them up, but it also does get back, I would say, and it would probably stipulate to Doug Hamp that it comes back to us really looking at the Scripture, not at science per se, to really finalize what our particular view is. But just to rattle off a few of the things that are typically looked at in terms of age, the age of the Earth. Certainly, one of the most common areas is the whole issue of radiometric dating. I'm going to see if I can find. All right. So what I was doing is I was finishing up talking about the age thing, and I mentioned radiometric dating. I mentioned the fact that there are 40 different methods. The methods tend to be used and overlapped with one another to try to provide a more precise measurement. There are non-radiometric methods such as the tree ring method, which tends to allow us to look at events up to about 12,000 years ago. And I started to make the comment that one of the reasons why I am less enthusiastic about the young Earth view is that once you go past a certain point, I don't know what that point is, if it's 6,000 years or 10,000 years, but as soon as you get beyond that to a point, then you are immediately on the defensive for everything related to how old is the Earth. So even if you dispelled all of the radiometric methods, once you look at the evidence just within the tree rings in terms of the number of years this world has been around, we get to at least a 12,000-year-old method. And once we get there, then you have a philosophical problem with, well, when did the Lord create the heavens and the earth, and does that mean that we have to modify the young Earth view to allow for some kind of a day-age theory, and so forth? So it creates a bit of a dilemma. And so anyway, so that's one of the arguments. You guys do you still have me there?
Yep, we do. You have you have 5 minutes left. 5 minutes
or so. Okay. Several things that could be discussed as well. Certainly, just looking at the scarring of the planets, the fact that the Moon is scarred the way that it is, Mars is scarred the way that it is. It would suggest that it's very probable that the worlds in our solar system have been around for far longer than a 6 to 10,000 year period of time. Then we look at things such as the magnetic geomagnetism, as we look at the oceans, the floor, the spreading of the floors in the oceans. We know that the igneous rocks, as they are pushed out of the trenches in the various oceans, that the iron and other minerals in the rocks tend to align to the north and south poles. This is one of the reasons why we know that there are pole reversals, that according to the timing that's established in this method, it appears that every 100,000 to a million years that the poles reverse. North becomes south, south becomes north, and the spreading of the ocean floor is just like a recording machine, in effect, that it tracks and traps, in effect, the polarity or the minerals as they align with the poles, and so it creates a clock of its own sort. We know from thanks to Al Gore, we know that there are drillings, ice cores that have been taken. In Greenland, the ice cores only appear to be in the neighborhood of 70,000 years old, but in the Antarctica, the ice cores tend to appear to be as old as 500,000 years old. And so there are many different methods for dating the world, and it does appear that the world is older than 10,000 years. And so I will just make those comments, and Doug, let you, if you will, go ahead and respond to those.
All right. Well, Doug Hamp, then you have 10 minutes to explain the science behind your position.
Okay. Well, first of all, talking about what we this whole idea of the ice cores. I mean, here's an example of a World War II bomber that was buried. It was left in Greenland at the end of World War II, and then they came back for it. And this thing had been, it was only 50 years that it had been put under, and it was buried under 270 feet of packed snow and ice. So in only 50 years, 270 feet of packed ice came about. So, as far as the ice cores being used to really give us a good indication of the age of the Earth, that doesn't make any sense. It doesn't fit with the evidence, unfortunately. Also, as far as the tree rings, I'm not aware of the 12,000 years. Actually, the oldest known tree rings that we have are really about 4,000 years, which put us back at the time of the flood, basically. And here's the thing: the old Earth is necessary, Darwin said, in order for his idea of very, very slow, bit-by-bit evolution to work. So if you have a young Earth, then evolution is impossible. And so this notion that, we believe in an old Earth, and then the Bible needs to fit around that, doesn't make any sense. It does not fit with the data. The old Earth was invented because the idea of evolution required it to be so. So though I acknowledge that Doug doesn't directly believe in evolution, still the old Earth and the gap theory or theistic evolution, however you want to put that, is necessary for evolution to work. And we have to go back and look at the time of the flood. The flood was a huge event. I mean, it's like unlike any other in world history. And what happens is the clocks get reset at that time. This idea of an old Earth, it doesn't fit with the data. Once again, and I want to point people to evolutionfacts.com. It's a wonderful website. It's also a great book that you can get. But the Earth is far from being millions and billions of years old. First of all, we have some evidence from the stars themselves. There are many star clusters in the universe. Each one is a circular ball composed of billions upon billions of stars, each with its own orbit. Science tells us that some of these clusters with their stars are moving so rapidly together in a certain direction that it should be impossible for them to remain together if the universe was very old. How about large stars? Some stars are so enormous in diameter that it is thought that they could not have existed for even a few million years. Otherwise, their initial larger mass would have been impossibly large. These massive stars radiate energy very rapidly, some as much as 100,000 to 1 million times more rapidly than our own sun. On the hydrogen basis of stellar energy, they could not have contained enough hydrogen to radiate at such fast rates for long ages because their initial mass would have had to be far too gigantic. The same is true, of course, of our sun. Solar collapse. Research studies indicate that our sun is gradually shrinking at a steady rate of seconds of arc per second. At its rate of shrinkage, as little as 50,000 years ago, the sun would have been so large that our oceans would boil. But in far less a time than 50,000 years, life here would have ceased to exist. So, again, there's this evidence after evidence that the Earth is not old. It's actually quite young. And there's an entirely different model that we can look at to understand the origins of the universe. And that is the electric universe theory. And one of the chief proponents of this is Barry Setterfield. He's put together an incredible understanding of plasma. Plasma is the fourth state of energy where an atom has its electrons stripped off. And starting with water, what we have to understand in Genesis 1:2, it's not that the earth was submerged underwater. The earth was water. That's the point. The earth was water at that point. And based on a plasma basis of that, so earth, in other words, water, with its electrons stripped off, the plasma behaves very differently. And using electricity to charge that, you could then come up with all of the known elements in the universe, starting with hydrogen, which is where the Big Bang theorists start. You don't get that. But starting with water, you can get all of the known elements in the universe within 13 minutes. And the great thing about it is that light travels at a much, much faster rate than what it currently travels at. So there's no problem for things to be billions of light years away. It would have traveled at a much faster rate. And what's also amazing about this is that this has been modeled. This is actually happening. We can look at how universes could have been formed in the laboratory, not just using mathematical speculation. So looking in the laboratory, we can actually see the models of this and how it would look. So there, if you can see my screen, this is a galaxy simulation based on electrical modeling. And so, in other words, this is actually happening in the laboratory. This is not something that we don't actually get to see. They're doing this using electricity to produce things that look just like galaxies. So, if we start with an electric universe model, then we see that it could have happened, according to Barry Setterfield, in about 8,000 years' time, and the entire universe could have been, 8,000 years ago, I should say, and the entire universe could have been created in about 6 days, he says, based on his modeling of the electric universe, of plasma, etc. So the other thing is that if we're going to go back to radiometric dating, well, which one are you going to use? Because they all give you different kinds of ages. If we look at the uranium, thorium, lead dating, or rubidium, strontium dating, or potassium, argon dating, they all have some really major holes in them. They have 7 initial assumptions. First of all, each system has to be a closed system. That is, nothing can contaminate any of the parents or the daughter products while they're going through their decay process. And of course, that's unlikely to happen. A billion years ago, that nothing is going to contaminate it. That doesn't make any sense. Secondly, each system must initially have contained none of its daughter products. Well, how would we possibly know that? We can't know that. We can't confirm that. Thirdly, the process rate must always have been the same. The decay rate must never have changed. Well, how do we know that? We don't know if it's changed over the last billion years. Lots of things could happen in a billion years. We just have no idea of what that could be. Secondly, the half-life could not have changed. The decay rate could not have changed. 5, if any change occurred in past ages in the blanket of atmosphere surrounding our planet, this would greatly affect the rocks on clocks in radioactive minerals. And of course, keep in mind that things would have been reset at the time of the flood. Any change, 6, any change in the Van Allen belt would powerfully affect the transformation of time of radioactive minerals. And then 7, a basic assumption of all radioactive dating methods is that the clock had to start at the beginning. That is, no daughter products were present, only those elements at the top of the radioactive chain were in existence. And I also want to point out that this is completely misunderstanding and ignoring the fall of Adam. I mean, the fall of Adam had a direct effect on planet Earth, because Adam comes from the Hebrew word Adam, and he comes from the Adamah, the earth, the soil, the dirt. So Adam is basically the dirt man. He is like if you were to build a world out of Legos, he's Lego man. And whatever happens to Lego man happens to all the Legos. Whatever happens
Doug, you have 1 minute left.
Whatever happens to Adam happens to the Adamah. So when Adam fell, when he died, that death spread. It spread to everything that he was connected to, which is literally everything. So this is where the ruin restoration theory comes up completely lacking, because it's not looking at, first of all, the text of the Hebrew. It's ignoring the major flaws of radiometric dating. We haven't gotten into carbon-14 dating. There's the same problems with that, and this is all based on evolution. It's based on the need for large amounts of time so that evolution, even though you don't believe in evolution, but it's based on the need for evolution to actually occur. So why would we go back to godless scientists who are, not looking for God? They don't think there is a God. They're looking for a way out of God, and then use their very, very flawed methods to come up with an age for the universe, when the Bible tells us that it was about 6,000 years ago. Let's say 6 to 10 for whatever. But, it's a very short period ago that God created everything. It wasn't millions and billions of years ago. And I just wanted to say that God is the one who created darkness by, it's kind of a different topic here, but just getting back to a previous thought, God is the one who created darkness. God created all things good. Everything was good. Even Satan was good in the first week of creation. Satan had not yet fallen. He was still good. That's why God says everything was good, and he was very pleased with it.
All right, that is your time. Now, Doug Woodward, you have 5 minutes to discuss. Yes, to discuss discuss and or challenge what the other has said, and then after that, Doug Hamp will be given 5 minutes. So go ahead.
Very good. Well, certainly, both of these Dougs, this Doug and that Doug, are neither one of us are scientists, and so we probably do a pretty slipshod job of of trying to argue the science. I believe one of the things we'll do as a follow-up is we'll probably either do a posting to a common website or we'll have blogs. There are a series of articles that I would think both Doug Hamp and myself would want to share with folks that want to do some more research on this. One of the things, I'll just make a comment related to the issue of the parent and daughter processes in the really dating rocks. No, I think that statement that radiometric dating does not take into account the fact that you have to have a completely uncontaminated environment and that there has to be an absence of the daughter products. The parent product, for instance, and just to explain, the potassium-40 versus the argon-40, the theory is that behind this dating method is that the argon is a gas, it escapes rapidly. Once the rock is solidified, then there's very little argon in the rock. There would still be some, but there is a method that is used in the dating process to subtract out what would be a sort of a resident amount of the daughter product, the argon-40. What happens over time is through the dating, through the radioactive decay process, the potassium-40 changes into argon-40, and it is able then to be detected, and based upon the percentages of how much that radiation has occurred, that radioactivity has occurred, the rock is able to be dated. So, not a true statement. I will only say that much. I would have to read, and we would have to dig in on perhaps any one of these dating methods to do justice to it. But I would basically say we probably better stick more with the scripture and less with the science. Although I would stipulate that I think there are some good evidences, scientific evidences for a younger Earth. I think the thing I would pose as a kind of a question is, does the young Earth theory break down too rapidly? It's sort of an apologetics argument. My sense is that once a person basically commits to the young Earth argument, that they are then in a defensive stance. Basically anything in the scientific community that comes up that relates to the age of the Earth, the perceived age of the Earth, it puts the young Earth creationists on a defensive posture. That's one of the good things about the ruin restoration theory, as it does not. And while you indicate, Doug, that the massive amount of time is necessary for the evolutionists to be able to theorize that mutations could happen and changes in forms could occur. I would agree that that is one of the reasons why the evolutionist really wants the universe to be very, very old. I would also say that I'm not necessarily committed to the concept that the universe is or whether the universe is 13.7 billion years old and the Earth 4.5 billion, but I am committed to the idea that it is certainly older than 6,000 or 10,000 years.
Doug, you have 1 minute left.
All right. And so anyway, so I would say that what we would do well for our audience to share some of the articles that we have that represent both of these points of view and let them do some reading on their own, because I'm just afraid that we can't do an adequate job of arguing the science here. I'm done.
All right. Well, Doug Hamp, you have 5 minutes to respond.
Well, the idea that accepting the old dates of the universe is somehow good because we're not in a defensive position. I'd just like to remind you, Doug, that we are in a defensive position because we believe that God did any of this stuff, right? We believe that there is a God. We believe that it was by His handiwork that all this came about, regardless of the time it took. So we're already, on the defense as far as the world is concerned. And the very reason they're invoking millions and billions of years for all this is because they don't believe in a God. So they need a magic wand, and they think that magic wand is time. That's the only power they have, is that if you give it enough time, that somehow it's going to come through. So I guess we can go back and forth in the science. There's no question about that. I would suggest that the creationists who are going back to a theistic evolution or progressive evolution, or even the gap theory, using, you really what you're doing is you're going back to the time of Charles Lyell when he started saying, oh no, that the key to the past is the present, and things have very slowly evolved. The Grand Canyon, for example, was slowly cut out of, it was cut out by the Colorado River flowing ever so slowly over, what used to be hundreds of thousands of years, and of course now it's turned into millions of years. But there's a real problem with the topography there, that it actually has to go uphill in order to carve out that. It's completely ignoring the evidence of the flood. The flood is a major part, and I'm not sure what you do with the flood, but the flood will account for so many of the geologic phenomena that we see. So we can't ignore that.
I would agree. Just to insert, I do believe in catastrophism, which is really the geologic school that believes that the flood of Noah was the predominant factor influencing the geology, what we see in the earth. So I do agree with that. Maybe the problem you have with me is I believe in two floods, not just one. We'll talk more about that in a moment.
Yeah, well, I'm aware that you believe in two floods, which I would argue is completely unbiblical. We have from 2 Peter, it tells us that the earth was destroyed once by the flood, and then it's going to be destroyed again by fire. So, there's no place that we see that there's three earths. In fact, we see in Revelation 21:1, John says, I saw new heavens and a new earth, for the first heavens and the first earth passed away. So, we're not, there's no, this whole idea that God first, he created something and that he gave it to the angels, that's not true. It's just not in the Bible. And we haven't seen any arguments that you've proposed that prove it from the language. You haven't proved it from the grammar. You haven't given us verses that substantiate that. In fact, we've seen just the opposite, that Exodus 20, verse 11 says that God did everything, the heavens and the earth and everything therein, in 6 literal days. We have that repeated in Exodus 31. So the science is suspect because it's already based on a need for there to be an old earth so that there doesn't have to be a God. So I guess at this point I'm curious, why do you hold to the gap theory? What is it that you see either biblically, again, what you can point to biblically that demands that can prove that? I mean, I know that it's kind of a nice theory and it might explain when Satan fell, and we can deal with that in turn, but what's the strong evidence that shows you that there's actually a gap, besides maybe the word became, which I can show you just as easily that it doesn't. In fact, there's another form. If God had really wanted to say it became, he could have used, for example, the passive of the word to be, so it could have been nihie, but he didn't use that. He just used the word haita, which just means was. So, and I have explained that grammatically, the passage is one contiguous event. There's nothing in there that supports the gap theory.
Well, let's move on and talk about the fall of Lucifer.
Here, let me interject real quick, because that's a perfect segue into our next section, which seems like that's what we're moving into.